This episode will concentrate on people of the sea. Now, if you look at the land of Canaan, as it's called, it is sometimes referred to as Phoenicia. That is the coastal part of the central part of Canaan, roughly from northern Israel to the modern Turkish-Syrian frontier. Phoenicia is the name that the Greeks gave to this land. In Greek, it means the land of purple, which is much like the name the people gave themselves, Canaan. It seems to be a direct translation of the Canaanite self-name. Now, are the people themselves purple? Are they red? Or do they get that name from a dye that they become especially famous for? Royal purple, the most expensive clothing dye in the ancient world. So expensive that it would become reserved only for royalty and people of the highest classes, kings, princes, senators, things like that. It is a dye that is made from squeezing sea snails that live along the coast of what's now Lebanon. It takes a lot of snails to get the dye. It is a complicated process. It will be replicated in one of the Phoenician colonies in North Africa, but it is always a very difficult, very expensive way of getting dye. You can see some examples of the color. Some shades of Tyrian purple are more reddish or maroon, but in the time before chemical dyes were available, this was incredibly expensive, which made it valuable. Now, the Phoenicians live in city-states, going from the north to the south. You know, the northernmost is the city of Arwad, which is located on an island off the coast of Syria. To the south of that, what's now Lebanon, Tripoli, Byblos, Beirut, Sidon, then Tyre. Tyre, which you see in this picture, was originally on an island. We'll find out about how it stopped being on an island in about a week. Now, and then further south, cities in what's now Israel of Akko or Accra and Dor. Of these, the city of Byblos, Javel, is probably the first one to become prominent. And that again has to do with geography. If you are in Lebanon, coming from the sea, a short distance back rise some of the highest mountains along the Mediterranean coast, Mount Lebanon. The peaks of Mount Lebanon are permanently covered with snow. There's ski resorts now. It used to be a claim of Lebanese tourism that you could go skiing in the morning and then go swimming in the sea in the afternoon, because these are so close to each other. Now, below the snow caps, these mountains were heavily forested, and the main tree growing on Mount Lebanon were cedars. The cedars of Lebanon are the largest trees growing in the eastern Mediterranean. You can get an idea of the size if you look at this picture and see the people standing next to one of the roots. These are truly massive trees. They were prized throughout the ancient Near East. And if you recall, part of this, that both Egypt and the southern two-thirds of Mesopotamia don't have native woods, so they would need to import wood for making furniture and all sorts of other things. The Egyptians, in particular, were very interested in the cedars of Lebanon. And even in early in the Old Kingdom, we know that Egyptians are traveling up to the city of Byblos to purchase timber. Merchants from Byblos see what's going on. They build boats out of the timber from their own country, begin sailing to Egypt to sell wood. They come back with papyrus and other material. Interestingly, Byblos will become the main center for the export of papyrus paper to places outside of Egypt, so much so that when the Greeks begin writing, they buy their writing material from merchants from Byblos. So they call writing materials things that come from Byblos, that is, biblios, or books. We get the word Bible, bibliography, from the name of the city of Byblos. Now, the merchants of Byblos will also begin taking copper, the island of Cyprus, to Egypt. They'll take Nubian gold from Egypt elsewhere in the north and carry many Egyptian ideas and spread them. So you can see with these Canaanite coffins, there's some heavy and I think fairly obvious Egyptian influence that they'll bring home. Now, the ships that they take tend to be relatively simple, but they have a sail, single sail. They have oars, but they mostly rely on their sails. These ships would be well enough made that they can travel very long distances. They will sail the entire length of the Mediterranean, and as we'll see, well beyond it. In these ships, they'll carry their purple cloth. They'll carry the cedar wood that will make them famous. And they will keep coming up with new products to trade, to get metal to take to Egypt, to buy products from Egypt that are desired by everyone else. And arguably the killer product that they discover, grapes. Before the Phoenicians, people in Canaan, people in Mesopotamia, people in Egypt like to drink alcohol. But the only alcohol they have available is beer. And beer has a problem. You make beer, you use grain, barley, wheat, rye, usually barley. And you'll have an alcoholic beverage about, in this period, about 5% alcohol. Fill a pot with it, put it on a shelf, and after about 60 days, it starts to go off and turn into malt vinegar. So you can't store a lot of beer. Beer becomes bitter, has a low alcohol content. Wine, on the other hand, it can last for literal centuries if it's stored properly. It is sweeter, has a higher sugar content. It has a higher alcohol content in the type of beer that's being made. It is something that many, many people find desirable. And the Phoenicians are the first people anywhere in the world to develop a commercial wine industry. They fill large pots, you see some of them, with the juice of the grapes they grow, carry these down to Egypt, carry them all across the Mediterranean. We know that the Phoenicians are the people who will bring growing grapes and making wine to the Greeks, the Italians, the French, the Spanish, and the North Africans. Wine is something people really, really want. We know in the ancient period, it is sort of the first commercial drug trade. Phoenician merchants, later Greek merchants, will arrive in an area. They will offer to sell one of these large jars of wine for whatever the local people have available. If they have metal, they'll give them metal. If they have food, grain, they'll take that. If they have ivory, other desirable things that they can sell when they get back home, they'll take that. And if they have nothing else, the Phoenicians and later the Greeks will trade wine for slaves. We have a piece of evidence from about 500-600 BC talking about Greek wine merchants going to southern France, where the local tribes will trade or so love wine so much and do not have the ability to grow it yet, that the going price for a jar, an amphora of wine, is one child, and even chieftains from the Gauls, as the people who lived in France at the time, would trade their own daughters to buy wine. And this is a serious level of addiction. It is a level of addiction that I think we can think of more modern parallels with substances like meth, cocaine, or heroin, where people would be willing to literally sell their children to get their fix. It is then as drug lords that the Phoenicians really get going as merchants. They do not, of course, just carry products, they also carry ideas. They are a culture influenced by both Egypt and Mesopotamia at home. As you can see from these two separate pieces, one shows heavy Mesopotamian influence, the other shows heavy Egyptian influence, but they also both have writing on them in that Canaanite or Phoenician style. They are written on in the alphabet, and it is the alphabet that is spread by these merchants throughout the whole of the Mediterranean and beyond. They soon find that it is good business practice to establish trading posts. Some of those trading posts remain little more than a warehouse and a place to pull up a ship. But others become settlements, and some of them will grow. They set up colonies all along the North African coast, from central Libya up to the Atlantic and Morocco, along the southern coast of Spain, Sicily, and Mediterranean islands. They'll set up colonies in Greece that will be overwhelmed by the Greeks. But you can see everywhere that's blue, it's a Phoenician colony. The most famous of these colonies, though, is a place called Carthage. Its name, Carthage, in Phoenician, has a meaning of new city. It is a new colony established probably around 814 BC. Later tradition says that the city is founded by Queen Alyssa, princess from the city of Tyre. Sometimes she'll be called Dido. In Carthage, the Phoenicians would purchase land from the local people to build their city on. These local people are called Athar or Afri. They are the namesakes of the entire continent of Africa. Those Afri will merge with Phoenician settlers around Carthage and create a blended society that speaks the Phoenician language, practices the religion, but has more and more ties into North Africa. When Tyre itself is conquered by the Persians, Carthage will become the leading city of the Phoenicians. And ultimately, Carthage will create a great empire, controlling North Africa, Spain, and quite a bit more. But we'll get back to them in about a week and a half. Now, I mentioned that the Phoenicians do some great feats of exploring. One of them we know about from Greek historian Herodotus. I think we've already met him. And he describes how Pharaoh Necho of the Said dynasty hired Phoenicians to build a navy for him. Because, of course, they're the best sailors, so he wants to have the best navy. And he decides that he would like to find out how far you can sail south from Egypt. So he has Phoenicians build ships. He's the pharaoh who builds a canal connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. And these Phoenician merchants set sail, a group of ships, going south down the Red Sea. And they disappear. And after 3 years, they return from the west. They tell, when they do, stories of what they found. They found it is possible to sail all the way around Africa. It took them 3 years, so it's not easy. Each year they would stop, plant food to grow grain, harvest it when it was ripe, and then set sail again, so they continued to have food. And in that way, made it all the way. The Greek author doesn't believe it's true because he says that in sailing around Libya, they had the sun upon their right hand. That is, the sun was in the north of the sky rather than the south, which, interestingly, is true and would not be known by people in the Mediterranean, Europe, for another 2,000 years. No one replicates this feat of sailing around Africa for another 2,000 years. They also seem to have left a genetic legacy. Recent DNA work on people of the Khoisan in South Africa shows that about 2,600 years ago, they have ancestors who seem to have come from Lebanon. Curious? This isn't the only one of their great voyages of exploration. In Carthage, there was, according to Greek and Roman authors, the temple, an account hanging on a wall describing the voyage of a great navigator named Hanno, about a century after this first sailing around Africa. And Hanno took 60 ships west from Carthage into the Atlantic Ocean, sailed down the west coast of Africa, establishing trading posts as he went southward, described the coast until they finally reach an erupting volcano, which is probably in what's now Cameroon. This is the first description of West Africa, describing the people they meet and trade with. They even mention a very kind of odd story that at one point they arrive on an island and the people who live on it are very different from any other people they've ever met. They do not wear clothes, they don't wear tools, they do not speak a recognizable language, and are covered with hair. The Phoenicians call them gorilla. They have a battle against them and killed a couple of them. It seems like these are probably chimpanzees. Later on, the Phoenician word that they use to describe these beings will be given to what we now call gorillas. Now, there are other voyages into the Atlantic going northwards. There are large Phoenician colonies in southern Spain where there are major mineral resources of gold, copper, and silver that the Phoenicians will exploit. They find that there's tin, material necessary for making bronze, located in the western part of what's the extreme southwestern part of it's now England and the extreme western bit of France. They'll sail to these islands regularly to get tin. They'll find gold resources in Ireland. The Phoenician captain who sails to the British Isles, Hamilcar, is the first person to describe these places in any language. Now, one question that comes up, if the Phoenicians could sail around Africa, if they could explore the west coast of Europe and Africa, could they have sailed farther? Could they have discovered the Americas? And in terms of technology, yeah, absolutely. Their ships, their sailing technology would have allowed them to cross the Atlantic and return. There's even a tiny amount of evidence that may or may not be solid for Phoenician arrival and discovery of the Azore Islands in the mid-Atlantic, and possibly some evidence from Brazil and elsewhere in the Americas of Phoenicians landing. However, if they did cross the Atlantic, they did not find anything they were interested in. They kept sailing to Spain because Spain had gold and silver and copper and all sorts of things that they desired. While they had definitely explored Africa, they did not find anything in West Africa that they wanted. If they sailed to the Americas, they went home without finding anything worth having and didn't come back. They were always driven by profit. Profit is always their number one idea. They did as merchants, they never really built an empire. The daughter colony of Carthage would build an empire, but they left an immense legacy down to us. They are the people that from whom we get the alphabet via the Greeks and Romans. There's a reason we refer to phonics and phonetic spelling, that is, spelling in the style of the Phoenicians. Wine and grape growing comes from them. And presumably there was much more to be known. But of their own writings, hardly anything has survived. Most of what we know comes either from the Greeks or the Romans, or from the Bible, or from neighbors of theirs, like the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians, whose writings have survived. There is only one complete book written in Phoenician that survives in a translation, and it is a guide to farming. Its very existence suggests that there was much, much more. Other than that, we only have a few quotations here and there. This flavors much of what we know, especially about their religion. And their religious views are very interesting, and we'll get to them in the next segment.